Welcome to the Nucleate Podcast. My name is Sam Kessel, and on this episode, I speak with my friends Ananya Zutshi and Ricky Barrett, who are the co-founders of Guardian Bio and were members of the original Nucleate Activator cohort. Ananya is the CEO of Guardian Bio. She studied biomedical engineering at Duke University for her undergraduate and pursued her MS MBA at Harvard University. She founded Guardian Bio while a Blavatnik Fellow at Harvard, and Guardian Bio was part of Y Combinator in 2022. Ricky Barrett is the CSO of Guardian Bio. He's an immunologist by training with his PhD from the University of Central Florida and pursued his postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania. He co-founded one of the first Nucleate chapters at UPenn. Guardian Bio is combining regenerative medicine and immunotherapy to create first-in-class conventional type 1 dendritic cell therapies, fully restoring the antigen presentation compartment in late-stage solid tumor patients. This conversation was a ton of fun to record. We hope you enjoy it. So let's start at the beginning with each of you. Tell us a little bit about your origin stories growing up. What was your childhood like? And how did that connect to where you are today?
I guess I can go first. Yeah, thanks. So I was actually born in India and moved to the US when I was 7. My family moved to Connecticut. It was kind of very immigrant 101. My dad got a job opportunity here. My parents thought we could make a really good life for me and my sister, so they moved here. And I have always really admired that because I can't imagine what it'd be like to be an adult with 2 kids and uproot your life and most of the people you know and come to a very, very different country, right? India and the US, especially now 20 plus years ago, very different places. And I'm extremely grateful for that because I grew up in Connecticut, ended up going to Duke for my undergrad, like you mentioned. But from the very beginning, my parents really instilled a lot of great values in us, a deep love and appreciation for education. And my dad was an engineer, which is a big part of how I came to be who I am. I was intrigued by this idea of, originally, I actually wanted to be a lawyer. And then I took bio in high school and I got so excited by the aspect of bioengineering that when I went home and I talked to my dad about it, he was just so pumped that I was thinking about engineering. Accidentally fell into one of the biggest Indian stereotypes, but came home and was like, I think I'm interested in engineering. And he was so excited that he got me like subscriptions for like Scientific American. And it would take me like a week to read an article because I had to look up every other word. But I just thought that the technologies that were being built were so incredible. And it was really from like then on that I decided that that was the world I wanted to be a part of. And I have just really never looked back.
Amazing. Started early on, sounds like. I mean, you toyed with the lawyer thing, but you eventually came to the right decision in biotech, but pretty early.
Yes, I literally have a picture from a high school yearbook. I think it was my sophomore or junior yearbook. And I was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a bioengineer. So I can make a difference in people's lives.
Amazing. All right, Ricky, go ahead.
Yeah. So I certainly never thought I would end up quite here, but I did know from my very earliest age I wanted to be some kind of scientist. I grew up in Florida as a little kind of surfer grom and, skipping class, trying to catch waves, getting out there in the ocean as much as I could. So maybe not the exemplary student back in middle school, high school time, but loved the ocean and did well enough that I was able to get into, a good program for marine biology because I figured, all right, I want to be a scientist, love being in the ocean. Went to Florida Atlantic University, which, has a very marine focus, and actually became a research diver there. So they keep a team of research scuba divers to perform any underwater research that goes on, and got into some of my first research doing marine natural products and drug discovery. So I knew I still wanted to kind of have that noble pursuit of helping human health, but I wasn't ready to let go of the ocean yet. And so that was kind of the way that I achieved it. And so did that, continued that into a master's and did some really cool projects, but really kind of fell to some of the funding issues that are more prevalent in the marine area, right? It doesn't as directly affect people's human health day in, day out. So there's a little bit less funding than I think there is for the pure biomedical plays. And each time I had a project cut for funding, it kind of moved me over a bit more into the lab and more into understanding more directly human biology. And I found out that I actually really liked it. And so ended up pursuing a PhD at University of Central Florida, and really got interested in that time in immunology because it helped me kind of just see the human body kind of as a whole, right? Immune cells are going everywhere in the human body. I liked that. I liked they were involved in kind of everything that went on. And so did a PhD in immunology there, and got in touch with a brilliant scientist at Penn during that time named Ellen Pure. And she convinced me, even though I kind of wanted to go into industry at this point, she convinced me to come up and do a postdoc with her. And she really sealed the deal by flying me up for the interview. And I had friends in Philly at the time. So I'm like, all right, free trip. I'll go check it out. But once I stepped foot on Penn's campus, I really fell in love with the collaborative environment there, all of the experts. I mean, we were working with Carl June and Drew Weissman and all of these brilliant people. I think her best friend, Jim Allison, had just won the Nobel Prize at the time. So that was a little cherry on top. And, it was just such an amazing environment to be in. And so I went there and ended up spending much longer than I ever anticipated. Spent 4 years there. Ellen really let me manage a lot of our academic industry partnerships since she knew I had an interest in that interface. And that kept me there longer than I anticipated, but doing some cool projects with large pharma companies all the way down to our lab spinning out a startup itself, which is what first kind of whet my appetite in the biotech startup world.
Fantastic. And for you, it sounds like it was a bit of more of an evolution over time from a genuine passion for the ocean and surfing and finding a connection to the scientific disciplines through that, and then gradually evolving into a more pure biotech type of career.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, honestly, it took me that long to build up the confidence to know I could do this. I had never really seen anybody around me do these types of things. They were always happening far away. And, in newspapers, you'd hear announcements of these cool discoveries and things. It took me a while to get to know people that were doing it and work with them and basically understand that, if I learn from these people, I can do this too. And that's kind of how I climbed all the way up to, I feel like, where I am now.
Love that. So let's talk about the founding of Guardian Bio. So for Ananya, for you, you decided to go back to school at Harvard for your MS and MBA. And you took a big risk coming out of that. I'm sure many of your classmates were pursuing consulting or investment banking and other high-paying careers. And you decided to go out and pursue entrepreneurship. And Ricky, for you, you were at a pretty prestigious lab at UPenn as a postdoc. And I'm sure, your colleagues pursued guaranteed high-paying positions, but you also took the risk to go into starting a company, which is definitely a big risk. So let's start with Ananya, but would love to get your thoughts on how you decided to make the pivot to entrepreneurship and probably turning down some high-paying opportunities to take on some risk.
Yeah, and to go back for a second here to talk about how I ended up in an MSMBA. Originally, when I had been in college studying biomedical engineering, my plan had been to go do a PhD. And I've actually been fascinated by cancer since college. I had wanted to do a PhD in something like immunology or cancer biology, something in that world. And if I can get a little personal here for a second, the summer between my junior and senior year, my dad ended up diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And it as you can imagine, it shook up a lot of my plans in a lot of ways. Looking ahead, I just wanted to be in a place that was a bit more stable, making a little bit more money than PhDs do, have more flexibility with like vacation time. So I decided not to apply for PhDs and decided to apply for jobs. But my thought had always been that I'll go back and do a PhD. And in college, I'd taken the GRE with that intention. Unfortunately, my dad passed away about a month after I graduated college, but I'm so grateful for his entire team for helping him. He got to see me graduate. He got to see me become an engineer. And that was I'm going to get a little emotional potentially talking about it, but I'm so grateful for that. But that's kind of how I ended up in the industry side of things. And then I just got really intrigued by the industry side, actually getting to be a part of making drugs happen. That when I hit the time I thought I was going to go back and get a PhD, I decided I just wanted to continue to stay in the industry. And it was really a friend of mine who was getting her PhD that I was talking to her, and she's like, look, if you are good with being on the team, you don't necessarily need a PhD. You need to make sure you're surrounded by them, but you don't necessarily need one yourself. And I was like, okay, I'm good with being on the team. Let me stay in industry. But I did end up getting a little restless in my jobs. I wanted to just be closer to the innovation, the science, which is what made me go back and get the MS MBA. And for me, that MS component was really important. I love calling myself an engineer. I often say, I'm not a scientist by training, I'm an engineer by training, and I will never let that go. So the fact that there was that component of the dual degree is what sold me. I don't think I would have gone back and just done an MBA, but the dual degree really sold me. So going into the MS MBA though, I think in my application, I was like, I want to be a product or project manager at a small to mid-sized pharma biotech company. I had no ambitions for entrepreneurship. Most of the people I knew had either gone into big companies or in academia. So this idea of entrepreneurship was frankly quite foreign to me. I still remember in I don't know if I should admit this, but in my first week, I was asking people what does VCPE stand for? Because I had never heard those terms before. And now I use them every day. So coming in, that was my idea. And then I will give Harvard Business School a lot of credit for this. That experience just really changed how I think about the impact that I can have and when I could have it. In my head, I was like, I have to wait 30 years before I can have this kind of impact. And now I was in a place where people were translating technologies, being able to deliver in really meaningful ways at all stages of their career. And that's what made me start really thinking about entrepreneurship, combined with being a part of the first, or not the first, but one of the first Activate cohorts before it was Nucleate, before it was all over the world. Kind of that existential reckoning I was having, combined with being a part of that program and seeing that, wow, I could really do this, is what made me start thinking about it. And I will also give a huge amount of credit to one of my mentors, Satish Shatakonda, who's a professor at HBS now. We spent a lot of time talking about what is entrepreneurship, what does it mean practically, what are the risks associated with it, what are the potential upsides. And I think one of the things I often say is, I think the idea of entrepreneurship, people most often associate with risk, but I think it's much more about your personal relationship with failure, because you take a bunch of people who tend to be quite high achieving and then put them in this place where it is more likely than not that you will fail. And you might fail in some pretty spectacular public ways. You have to really reckon with that before you can really dive into this. So a lot of my kind of mental hurdles that I had to go through was about being comfortable with the fact that, who knows, I'm running as fast as I can and I might be running towards a brick wall, but you just have to believe in what you're doing, be excited about the people that you're doing it with, and focus on that. And coming to terms with that is what made me be like, all right, I want to do this.
That's an amazing story about how you ended up taking that leap. And it sounds like inspiration in part by your father's passing, which I'm really sorry to hear that. But in addition to great mentors, and it sounds like the MS MBA program was really eye-opening for you. You weren't planning on going in to become an entrepreneur. It kind of happened to you while you were in the program, and because of the exposure and the conversations you had with mentors in the program.
Exactly. A third of my MS MBA class left to start a company, and I just don't think most of them have come back yet. So it was now around me, and I will, it was being around that environment that helped me see what we could achieve at, again, different stages of our career.
Absolutely. So Ricky, for you, coming out of the postdoc at UPenn in immunology, I'm sure you had industry opportunities. What made you decide to take the leap and pursue entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I probably had more exposure to it than most, even with the lab I was in and being around the groups who actually were spinning out some companies. But even in that setting, it still felt like a kind of insurmountable thing to do, to take that big of a leap and take on all of these responsibilities for which you have absolutely no training for, right? I knew how to develop a product scientifically, but I don't know how to call up lawyers and ask them for their help or execute contracts or, do all of those types of things. And I don't want to be too on brand here, but I'll say what really helped me fill that gap was Nucleate and the people that I was around there. There's in the path to getting to a successful company, there's a lot of stepping stones, right? Kind of stepping stones over water. And I think a lot of people have done a good job of spacing those out well for a startup that already exists and needs to grow. But there was always that first stepping stone that was missing, which is a place where somebody who has no exposure to the startup or that business world can ask stupid questions and figure it out and not feel like they're, being a burden to whoever they're asking. And I think that's what Nucleate did a good job for us filling in. When myself, Eric, Jingyi, there's a great group of us trainees at Penn who were kind of there building that first chapter for Philadelphia for Nucleate. And it really allowed us to bring experts and mentors together and ask dumb questions like how does venture capital work? Like, why would they give us money? What do they want back from that? How do we call up a lawyer and get that set up? How is this IP, what's valuable IP, what's not valuable? All of those kinds of questions kind of put that first stepping stone in place for, I think, a lot of us to ask questions without feeling like these are things we should already know. And that built a lot of confidence for me. But even then, I still felt like, maybe I could be the number 3 or number 4 person at a startup, right? I still want somebody kind of, a little above me to learn from. And then out of nowhere, like a wrecking ball, in comes Ananya. And we can get a bit more into the story of how we first met and how, everything first came together. But I will give Ananya a lot of credit that she gave me the confidence to be a number one, a founder, right? First person in, kind of where the buck stops. And a lot of that also came from the fact that we had very complementary skill sets, right? We weren't two of kind of the same person. Everything that I knew nothing about, Ananya had spent a lot of time thinking about and had experience in doing. And everything that Ananya didn't know about, I had spent probably longer than I intended to, in labs at midnight learning about the inner workings of a flow cytometer. And so those complementary skill sets gave us, I think, a lot of confidence to do this together.
So it wasn't out of the blue. Sorry, go ahead, Ananya.
Sorry. The one other thing I'll add there is we were really excited about what we were working on. I think that's what, even in our first couple of meetings, I was so excited by this technology and the impact it can have for cancer treatment. And, through Ricky, when we were first trying to feel each other as co-founders, he did his own research to help develop that own excitement. And this is entrepreneurship is hard. You have to be excited about what you're doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like for both of you, this wasn't fully out of the blue, and having the original cohort of Nucleate available to you for mentorship and to help explain some of those perplexing topics like legal that you talked about, Ricky, was probably very helpful. So it wasn't just, oh, we're drawing a startup on a paper, we're just going to go with it. There was also some guidance, mentorship, inspiration, and, a cohort of other people going through the same thing that made that leap a little bit smaller of a stretch, to mix metaphors a little bit here.
I should have mentioned too that when I first reached out to Ricky, I was a Blavatnik fellow at HBS. So it's a program specifically for life science entrepreneurship. Obviously, Nucleate is available to current MBA students, which is when I'd done it. But as an alumni of HBS, I became a Blavatnik fellow, and I still cannot believe how good that deal is. It's like the lowest risk way to do an extremely high risk company. I got to be Harvard staff for a year. So they helped cover some salary, helped cover benefits. So I didn't have to worry about those things. And I just got to spend all my time thinking about this technology and this company. And very similar to Nucleate, we also had access to mentors that have done this before that could help us think about how to do all of these things.
So similar, you had resources available to you that helped de-risk those very initial stages, so you weren't just out on your own trying to figure out how to start cell therapy in a garage.
Yeah.
Great. So let's dig into it. Let's talk about the formation of Guardian Bio. How did it come about from the beginning during the Blavatnik Fellowship? How did you specifically decide to pursue cell therapy specifically? Ananya, you were the initial founder. How was that? How were the decisions made to initially start this concept?
Yeah, this is an interesting story because originally, while I've been a Blavatnik Fellow, I was also working with this really very cool company called Celino. They're based in Cambridge, have just a really incredible technology for kind of scaling up cell therapy manufacturing. And originally, I knew I wanted to work on cell-based immuno-oncology. When my dad was sick was when some of the first CAR T data was coming out, so it's been in my mind for a long time. And originally, I was kind of working on this with them, with the idea of maybe we can build a technology, a product for their platform. And then it became, as I started getting really excited about dendritic cells and stem cell HSC-derived dendritic cells, it just became more apparent that the direction they were taking with that tech and the direction I want to go didn't make sense to necessarily do it together. So I ended up going out, finding Ricky, finding Carolina, who's our academic co-founder. The tech comes out of her lab. And then we kind of launched from there. I started looking at different immune cells and their pros and their cons, their strengths, their weaknesses. And the more I read and the more people I talked to, I started getting really intrigued by dendritic cells. Of course, every cell in the immune system is important. And the more you learn about the immune system, the more grateful you are to be alive. But if I had to pick the most important one, it kind of felt like I would pick dendritic cells. And then frankly, I was confused why I didn't hear more about them. And then I read more, talked to more people, learned about this really rich history that they have and how much has changed in the last few years. And again, I come from a more industry background. I come from this idea of if we can learn from our mistakes, that is a really, really powerful thing. Instead of necessarily just coming up with something that is brand new. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit of my industry influence playing in there versus academic influences. But how much we had learned from the history of dendritic cells and how much that had changed to enable a next generation today that addresses the limitations of the past, I thought was a really powerful thing. And that's what I started getting to that point when I was getting really excited about this particular subset of dendritic cells, when I started slowing down because I'm not an immunologist. And it was now starting to get really, really deep. And I was like, okay, I need an immunologist next to me who can dive deeper and faster into this than I ever could. And that's where Ricky came in.
Yeah, so Ananya had reached out to me. I actually had no idea why she was reaching out to me. I saw that she was affiliated with the company she mentioned before, Celino, at the time, that she was working on a few things. And I thought she was trying to hire me as a scientist there. And I didn't really have much intent of leaving Penn at the time, but I was fielding interviews just to get some reps in with people and see if anybody could ever make an offer that could actually get me to leave. So I'm like, all right, I'll hear her out. So we hop on a call, start talking for a bit. And the line of questioning, I was like, this doesn't seem like a normal interview. I'm like, this is kind of weird. And eventually I stopped her and I'm like, what are we talking about here? And she's like, oh, we're talking about founding a startup. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And we finished out the conversation, did some more, had some more discussions. And I remember just being my adrenaline through the roof after that call, because I went in just to have a kind of simple conversation, to see an interview, just to get some reps in. And coming out of it, I was like, crap, that's something I would like to do. The way that we just discussed this is something that is incredibly interesting, in a way of developing it that I'm actually interested in doing it. And that night, I don't even know if I hardly slept, because I, out of nowhere, realized, dang, this might be me moving to the next step if this keeps going the way I think it can go. And it did. And I was right to be anxious, because it's been a heck of a ride. But yeah, it was a very immediate moment at the end of that call that I realized this might actually be something that's going to happen.
So it's funny. A lot of times we have these conversations and there aren't always these big, thunderclap moments, but it sounds like that was one of them for you, Ricky, to have that conversation. And it just sounds like you weren't really thinking about starting your own company, but then once you got on this call and had this conversation with Ananya, you changed your mind on that, or you were inspired to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very immediate moment that I realized that this is something I may have the opportunity to do and that I want to do it. We did, Ananya and I worked together on some kind of different projects for a few months before the decision was actually made to co-found. So that happened, down the road after we had worked on several things together and found out that we actually could work well as a team and that, our skill sets are that complementary. I also tried to make this a slower phase, right? I, told my PI immediately, I'm going to work on this company thing. It's not going to affect what I do here on the lab. Everything we were working on at that time, I was just kind of doing nights and weekends. But then, it ended up actually transitioning much faster again. And so we can kind of go more in depth into that when we talk about the first money that came in to Guardian Bio. But yeah, I tried to drag it out as much as I could, but these things move fast.
If I could add one thing there. So I had a very methodical way I went about finding a co-founder, because I've seen experiences before in which having a technically strong person is, of course, important, but they also need to be the person that you want to found a company with. And when I was looking for a co-founder, I reached out to literally like 300 people, had coffee chats or Zoom chats, like 100 people. It was a very caffeinated winter. And then had a short list of a couple that I was like, okay, I think these people could be a co-founder. And we did little projects together as if we had been working together, because working with someone is very different than being their friend. It's very different than just about anything else. And especially, again, kind of a co-founding relationship, the additional layer that comes with that. And I wanted to make sure that we explore what that'd be like before actually jumping into it together. And at that same time that we were kind of working on this technical project, we were having a lot of conversations around what it means to be a co-founder, what it means to start a company, how it fits in with our life plans, how the people we love feel about us doing this type of stuff. We were having some really kind of awkward, hard conversations as people who were just getting to know each other, but it laid down a great foundation of trust between us. And that's how I knew that Ricky wasn't just technically a person that could handle doing this, but he was a person I wanted to start this company with.
And it's great to hear that you spent a lot of time up front having those conversations, because I'm certain not all entrepreneurs do. So it sounds like there was a lot of intentionality from both of you around moving forward on this and the amount of challenges that you were about to face together, and really trying to take into account family and the risks involved with this, and the challenges that are associated with founding a company and having a lot of uncertainty in your life, in terms of the hours, which I'm sure are all of the time and high pressure and high stakes, and also having a really good personal relationship in addition to a good working relationship, because this is not a 9 to 5 kind of gig. This is you two both taking substantial risks on each other moving this forward.
Yeah, and what Ananya put me through to vet me also actually convinced me that she was going to be a good co-founder as well. I'm like, if she puts this much care and methodical thinking into selecting the people that are going to be brought in close to this company and help run it, that's what I want from a CEO for sure. And even our academic co-founder kind of went through some of those same things, and that was key. I mean, Carolina, we'll hopefully talk more about her, has really been technically key to the success of this company, because she's one of the most phenomenal immunologists in the world.
Yeah, that's a great segue, Ricky. Let's talk about the core thesis for Guardian Bio. We touched on dendritic cells a little bit, but it'd be good to know a little bit more about why dendritic cell therapy is interesting to you, why you're pursuing it, and why you think it could potentially work in cancer. Our audience has a pretty broad range of backgrounds, some more scientifically oriented, some less so. But for the broader audience, can you describe the science behind Guardian Bio, dendritic cell therapy, and your scientific mentors that have been influential for this?
You want me to take this one? All right. So something interesting about a cancer biology. People actually develop cancer cells every day. That's something that's not probably super well known across the general population, but you do develop cancer cells every day. And one of the main ways the body protects itself from that is with the immune system, right? Our immune systems have very well-defined processes to recognize when an aberrant cell has developed, get the rest of the immune system trained against it, and then those killer cells go in and remove that. And for most people, that keeps us healthy every single day. We never have problems. We never even know that those cancer cells developed to begin with. It's only when a cancer cell develops that can also evade that process, shut it down in some way, that it is actually successful enough to grow and become a disease that's life-threatening, right? If it can evade that immunity, there's nothing left to stop it. And so this is something that I think a lot of different cancer therapeutics have not appropriately considered in the way that they treat cancer, right? A lot of different therapeutics are good at killing the cancer, but not at addressing that initial dysfunction that has allowed it to grow. And so one of the things that I think is core to what we're trying to do is address that dysfunction directly, right? The dendritic cell is the first step in that process. When I mentioned that the body has to first recognize that something's wrong, that's a dendritic cell's job. They're these sentinel cells that are kind of keeping an eye on the whole body. And when they sense that something's off, when they're activated, they can take up pieces of whatever they think is wrong or is a danger, and then present that to the rest of the immune system. And that's what kicks off that response to eliminate that. So obviously an incredibly important part. It's actually one of the main parts of immunity that cancer tries to wipe out early on so that it can survive. And so that's characteristic of almost every solid tumor that we look at when we're doing our indication analysis, is that these dendritic cell populations are very specifically targeted by the cancers. And these patients end up deficient with these cells. There's a lower number because they're no longer able to differentiate effectively. The ones that are there are dysfunctional. So they may be able to differentiate into a dendritic cell, but they can't be activated appropriately. And so they can't coordinate that response appropriately. And so that's why you see a lot of things like cancer vaccines suffer, right? You can have the best target in the world, but if you don't actually have the antigen presenting cells that are supposed to be dealing with that target and using it to train, it doesn't matter how great your target is, that missing link is not there to actually turn that into proper immunity. And so what we've been able to do, and this is something that has been tried before, right? Dendritic cell therapy, people understood these limitations in cancer patient immunity and tried to address it, but we didn't have the technology we have today. And many of the quote unquote dendritic cells that they were trying to use at the time aren't the actual antigen presenting cells that are normally initiating this process, right? And what we've realized from single cell sequencing and more of these advanced flow cytometry techniques is there's actually different types of dendritic cells. And in particular, there's one called a CDC1 that is really kind of at the forefront of leading anti-tumor immunity. And luckily, those cells have finally been better defined in the recent years. And this is very recent work that has better defined these populations and really understood not only that they're there and this is what they're doing, but how they're doing it. And we were able to take advantage of a lot of these recent breakthroughs, revisit this dendritic cell space with all of this new understanding. And the most important part, and again, big thanks to Carolina, the previous decades of work she had been doing, we were able to kind of reverse engineer how these cells come about and how they do their job and figure out a scalable, clinically compliant way to actually make these very rare immune cells from a patient's own stem cells. And what that allows us to do is now combine regenerative medicine with immunotherapy. And now we can just completely replace that antigen presentation compartment that has been a major bottleneck for these patients being able to mount productive immune responses. We can replace that with healthy, very immunogenic CDC1s that are the specific type of dendritic cell that's best for kicking off this response.
Excellent. It's really helpful to understand that the dendritic cells are really the sentries. They are alerting and initiating the immune response and recognizing the cancer cells to help support that broader immune response and recognize solid tumors. And the limitations of existing CAR T cell therapies in the past have been that those are mainly treating hematological malignancies or liquid tumors. For those less familiar, it's leukemia. That's where CAR T cells are primarily targeted, and there have not been any cell therapies yet for solid tumors. So this is an exciting development for patients with solid tumors such as lung cancer, liver cancer, etc. So let's talk about the pivot points that you faced at Guardian. Ananya, I think would be good to start with you here. What have been the most important pivot points? I'm assuming this has gone a lot of iterations since your initial vision. So it'd be good to get an understanding on what those key points have been and how you navigated those key decisions you had to make.
Yeah, I would say the three biggest quote unquote pivots that we've made would be one around the strategy of our company. The second would be around indication. And the third, kind of tied back to both those, is the way we tell our story. Maybe I'll start with indication first, because it's a question that every therapeutics company, whether your product or platform, is going to have to think about. And it is extremely complex discussion. But the short way is we spent a lot of time thinking about what is the right patient population to deploy the first product in. We talked to oncologists, we talked to scientists, Ricky did deep dives into like the tumor biology and the dendritic cell biology. But interestingly, I feel like classically we tend to do a lot of reading when it comes to this, but some of the biggest decisions that pushed us, now we're starting with melanoma, but when we first started talking about this, we were talking about triple negative breast cancer. We talked about ovarian cancer for a while and have really settled into melanoma. Some of the biggest drivers of that have been the oncologists that we've talked to. The real practical knowledge of like whether or not they would give this to their patients was some of the most powerful drivers of, again, that very first indication, along with kind of looking at the broader market forces and what was going on, what we would have to compete with, ended up just as important as the biology, or in some cases even more important as that very first clinical product. So pivoting around the indication. The second would be strategy. So I think classically we see a lot of companies around us raise a bunch of money, explore a couple of things before really nailing down. As one, because we started our company in a very tough time for biotech broadly. We launched in 2022, which is when things are going south fast for our industry in a lot of ways. Luckily, we're starting to see a lot of recovery, but it was tough when we launched. We had to change our strategy to be much more focused on the clinic. We didn't necessarily have the luxury to explore a bunch of things. We had to think constantly about, we need to get to the clinic with a product that we really believe can show efficacy in these patients. What is the disciplined series of experiments that we need to do to get there? And if there's other stuff that we'd like to do, excellent. We will put it in the parking lot and talk about it in a year or 3 years. But right now we need to focus on figuring out how to get to and through the clinic. And the third thing, kind of, again, leading into those other two, is how we tell the story. It's been many iterations of this, learning how to tell a story that is understandable and resonates with people. And it's really been about this, like, hey, this is how important dendritic cells are. This is what the past generation did. This is what the limitations were. And this is how we can fill all of those gaps so we have something that we really believe could be consistently successful across a wide range of patients. It took us a while to get to the proper way to tell that story. And it took a lot of conversations with different people, because when you think about this every day, constantly, it's just so easy to get lost in the weeds. And we needed to kind of go back to first principles, like, why do we believe in this? And why will that make other people believe in this, to be able to tell our story in the simplest, most resonant way?
Well, that's a really interesting overview. I know, so one of the themes is maintaining your focus and determining what that is. The other theme I noticed was a lot of getting external feedback based on your initial impression. So you didn't ask for someone from the outside to decide your strategy, but you asked for weigh-in on strategies that you were considering, and similar for indications. You had some preliminary ideas, and then you asked for market feedback from physicians or scientists to get some external perspective on your process. So it sounds like it was an iterative process for all of those, for your indication, selection, for your general strategy, and for your communication. You test things out, you get some feedback, and you iterate on it.
Exactly. That external feedback loop is hugely important.